You see, this is my life. It always will be. There's nothing else. Just us. And the cameras. And those wonderful people out there in the dark.
Well,
All right, mister.
welcome to another episode of Out There in the Dark. I am Azed Bajid, and with me as always is...
Tom Alexander. Hello.
Hello. How's it going?
Pretty good. How are you?
Eh.
Well, I'm very excited about today's episode.
Yeah, I think, excited and probably a little hesitant for me because I feel like anybody who hears this is going to hate my guts after this episode, probably.
Me most of all.
Yeah, well, I mean, can you hate me any more than you do? I mean,
There's no bottom.
yeah, there's no bound to your contempt. The reason why we're excited is we're jumping on the old cultural bandwagon here.
Once again.
Sellouts. And me and Tom went to go see both Oppenheimer and Barbie together.
That's right.
And we're going to talk about this whole crazy Barbenheimer phenomenon from various angles.
But we're going to throw in a little asteroid city, so
Yes, because...
we could call it Barbenheimer City?
T. Barbenheimer T.
Okay.
Asteroid Barbenheimer.
Stop.
Yeah, because I actually think that the two movies should have been Asteroid City and Oppenheimer, because they're almost exactly the same movie in some ways. But okay, let's talk a little bit about this cultural phenomenon, which came out of sort of nowhere, right? I mean, at least to the layperson. Why these two movies? And they seem like it seems like a big cultural joke almost, right? Like
I think it started that way.
Right.
It was sort of an internet. Basically, once the two films were announced as opening on the July 21st weekend, somehow it became this. People went Barbenheimer.
Mm-hmm.
Which film are we going to go see? And everyone wanted to see both. And I think it's interesting because counter programming like this happens all the time. But this is the first time I've ever seen where two films that are quite very different.
Mm-hmm.
Opening opposite each other kind of lifted each other up.
Yeah,
So, as opposed to, say, knocking each other down.
exactly. It almost became like a non-competitive and more about you're going to go see one, you got to go see the other, and
Right.
whether you did it on the same day, which I think if you did that, something's wrong with you.
But a lot of people did.
I know.
Even there was a whole thing, a video going around of Tom Cruise in an interview saying, we got to go see Barbenheimer. I'm going to see Barbie first, and I'm going to see Oppenheimer second, and we're going to see them on the same day, and blah, 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 blah.
This reminds me a lot of
People were debating which one they're going to see first.
I know, but this reminds me a lot of like back in the 60s or whatever, people would like swallow goldfish, or like pack themselves into a phone booth, that kind of thing. It just seems like a prank, like a kind of like, I guess planking was the last thing like that, right? I mean, people died actually doing planking, and now it's not even a thing.
They would do it
anymore.
on a tower. Yeah.
Yeah, planking on a tower. But
This was like the thing. It just sort of grew and grew and grew thanks to, the internet. But it kind of worked. It worked for everybody. And what was exciting from an industry point of view was that we are still reeling from the effects of the lockdowns of COVID.
Yep.
And trying to get people back into movie theaters.
Yep.
And we're watching high-profile films all summer long, like The Flash and Indiana Jones.
They completely tanked, right?
Pretty much tank, or at least seriously underperform. And here are two films that are original films. They're not part of a franchise. They're not sequels. And they both went way beyond box office expectations. And they lifted each other up, which we've never seen before. And
Yeah, it's a very interesting parallel because once you put those two movies together, it's inevitable you're going to try to find what the patterns are, whether that's whether it's indicative of reality or not, you're going to do it, right? And so, like, here you have like a movie, a biopic about, a renowned, very famous, controversial scientist, and then you have a biopic as well about a plastic doll. So, I mean, but there is. It's fascinating to think about, like, a little bit, like the fact that you have these two biographies, almost, one of a real, so-called, in quotes, real person, and then one about a fictional character, right? Who, whatever. I mean, it's still an interesting thing because it's about the story of both Barbie and Oppenheimer's journey towards some kind of redemption, some kind of
some liberation of some
kind of liberation from the trap that they were
freedom
in.
from the construct that
Exactly.
birthed them in a way.
Exactly, yeah, and I think that's an interesting parallel. I'm sure that had nothing to do with why it got started, but
No, I don't think so. I don't. The Barbenheimer thing happened before anybody, of course, saw either film. And
now do you think this was somehow planted by studios? Like,
there's a lot of conspiracy theories about that one, but no, I don't think that. It was definitely not planted.
it was just an accident of.
It was an accident of Oppenheimer was first scheduled for the July 21st, and then Warner Brothers scheduled Barbie on the same weekend. And so you had Universal and Warner's with these competing films. And there are some theories that, Christopher Nolan had always worked with Warner's. Then he got mad at them because they started dumping all their movies on HBO Max instead of, with these shortened theatrical windows.
Right.
And then he was like, well, screw you. And he took Oppenheimer to Universal. And then the theory is that Warner Brothers wanted to have revenge on Nolan by putting Barbie against it's just ridiculous. I don't think that's got anything to do with it.
But it's interesting, like what you were saying earlier, like, the fact that these, behemoth studios tried to, outdo each other. And yet, like you said, what the audience did is they said, well, we'll just go see both of them, right? Yeah. And yeah, that's actually a fascinating cultural movement in some ways, right? That it's not just about a competition between the two of them, but we'll go see both. And considering that they're both not short movies, right? I mean, even Barbie's 2 hours, right? And Oppenheimer's 3 hours, right? I mean, to go see both in the same day, that's a big commitment.
Like, sold out screenings. You know, like it was just completely packed everywhere.
Yeah.
Barbie ended up being the bigger film, and understandably so, because it's a wider audience.
Yeah, you're going to hit teen girls and teen boys too, right?
Younger. Oppenheimer was
teen gender non-specifics, right? So
of course,
you're going to get like everybody on this one, right? So
I would have thought Oppenheimer would be more male. But turns out, like just anecdotally, like I knew so many women who wanted to see Oppenheimer much more than they wanted to see Barbie.
Do you really need an explanation for that one? Hello, Cillian Murphy. My wife is like completely in love with him. Like she watched all of Peaky Blinders after the movie, and then she's making me watch it with her now.
So she's watching them again.
Exactly. And it's all because she just wants to look at that dreamy face, right?
I've never seen Peaky Blinders. How was it?
I mean, I've only seen 2 episodes now, but it reminds me a lot of Boardwalk Empire. It's got that same kind of feel to it.
Which I also never saw.
Oh.
I know.
What?
I know.
Dude, seriously, I got to go.
It's too much. There's too much to watch.
I'm going to judge you so harshly now.
Oh, you mean still? So anyway.
30 years of judging.
So I think it's great, and I think it also gave a good vote of confidence for the film industry.
Yeah, for sure. It was really great to go into the theaters with a full audience, I have to say.
Yeah, I mean, it could be comparable to Titanic back in the 90s, because before Titanic opened, there was a lull. There was a lull. Mm. We were saying, well, who's going to go see? People aren't seeing films anymore. They're watching TV. It was sort of the start of the, the HBO, The Sopranos, and The Wire, and
Yeah.
and all that. And then Titanic came out, and then it was like, great, people are going back to the movies, and that brought a resurgence to it. Now, I don't know if Barbenheimer means more people are going to come back to the movies. I think since the pandemic, we've seen kind of a sea change in behavioral patterns where so many people are watching stuff at home.
Yeah.
So it remains to be seen, and I don't see blockbusters on the horizon, to be honest.
Well, it kind of reminds me of like the hybrid work situation, right? It's like, corporations are now trying to get their staff back in the offices a little bit more. But this idea that you can work from home and it's viable is not going to go away, right? But I think what does happen is after you've spent so much time at home, you're like, I'd like to go back to the office today, right? So it becomes something where you're like, okay, I see the benefit of actually leaving my house, going out and making, meeting some new people and being around strangers or whatever. There is the whole home thing that the pandemic put us through, I think, made us feel like we were kings, or queens, just kind of like in our own place, like do whatever we want. And I agree with that, but but it does show us that just getting out into the world is really important for our state of mental health. Like, otherwise you get kind of into this Howard Hughesy kind of wearing Kleenex boxes on your feet.
Those jars of urine by your feet.
Well, no, that has nothing to do with it. You know what, Tom? That's none of your business what I do with my jars of urine.
Yeah, I like doing both. I work from home half the week, and
right.
Pros and cons for each.
Yeah, pros and cons for each. I mean, we're also old, so I mean, like, for us, the pro is just, can I take a nap in the afternoon? Okay. No, but I guess what I'm saying is that as a cultural phenomenon, I think this is a really interesting one. I would not have seen it coming, but I love it. I think the whole Barbenheimer thing is really funny, and what I love about it is that these big corporations are going to try to emulate it again, but they're never going to be able to do it because it's random.
It has to be organic.
Yeah, exactly. That's the
orchestrate it.
That's the excellent
cynical
thing.
Marketing ploy.
You could have put like as many bucks into the marketing campaign as possible, and you would never have received this kind of boost.
No.
Right? And so that just shows that the power still lies with people, right? Just being able to kind of make something go viral.
Yeah.
And
I also think it's great because I we'll talk about the issues we have with these films.
Yeah.
But by and large, most people I know really liked both films.
Yes.
And I think they're good films. I mean, for all intents and purposes, they're quality filmmaking.
Yep.
At hand.
I agree.
So
I agree.
It's not like some piece of garbage that just took
exactly.
off. Like Snakes on a Plane years ago that became this internet.
How
thing,
dare you?
Then it bombed.
The greatest film ever made, especially the dubbed version that you see on TV. Because you know what he says. He usually the real line is, "I am so motherfucking sick of these motherfucking snakes on this plane." But on the TV version, he goes, "I am so sick of these monkey jumping snakes on this." Wait for it. On this Monday to Friday plane.
Enough is enough! I have had it with these monkey fighting snakes on this Monday to Friday plane! Everybody strap in! I'm about to open some freaking windows.
I like it better.
Yes, it is way better. But yeah, no, I totally get it. Like Cocaine Bear or whatever, like these kind of gimmicky Sharknado movies, right? That can get people excited. But you're right. This is, you would think, Barbie is going to suck, and Oppenheimer is going to be this, Oscar contender, but absolutely not, right? I mean, I did have more problems with Barbie, but I still think as a movie, it was very enjoyable. It was smart. It had a lot of funny lines, Politically, I had some issues with it, but we'll get into that when we talk about it. But yeah, both movies were strong, and that's good to see. Asteroid City, interestingly enough, which I think is actually closer to something like Oppenheimer. I think sort of dealing in the same terrain and in the same kind of general thematics, right? Did not do so well, though, right? It didn't kind of go along for the ride, which is interesting because, I mean, you would think that's the one that makes a lot more sense, right?
Well, Asteroid City, it opened a month before,
right,
in June. And it had already played the Cannes Film Festival where the reactions were mixed.
Right.
And it opened a little disappointingly, I think. Most people I know, and I share this feeling, didn't think it quite worked.
I
but
really
I know
liked
a lot
it,
of, I know, like yourself,
Yeah.
I do know a lot of people who really, really liked it a lot and thought it was one of Wes Anderson's best films. I felt it was one of his weaker films. But I also have a lot of problems with Wes Anderson generally.
Okay.
That's a whole...
Yeah, I mean...
Hit and miss, for me, he's mostly miss.
Whoa, mostly miss. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right.
He's an important filmmaker.
He is, but I totally understand when people don't like his movies too, because I think it's easy to kind of see them as pretentious and twee and all that stuff, right? And very, quirky and, whatever. And in this one, though, I really felt like there was in the same way that Barbie is an extremely meta, is very like not earnest, right? Like it's very meta and it's very ironic. I think Asteroid City is also very meta, but it's meta about Wes Anderson himself. Like I thought it was very much a parody of his own position, in the filmmaking world and his own style. And it was so hyper over the top, right?
Yeah.
Like the style of it looked like, almost looked bad at a point. You know what I mean? Because it was
both It and Barbie sort of live in this American desert of Wile E. Coyote world where everything looks like, a manufactured.
Yeah, everything looks manufactured, and the color scheme in Asteroid City was a lot more like Barbie, because it was like these colors were not natural, right? No. Like they were very, very. You could see that they really went nuts in the color correction, and in the grading, where they just kind of pushed all the contrast in every one of the colors really high, right? And
much like how Barbie exists in Barbie world and also in the real world, Asteroid City exists in the play.
Yeah.
And then it goes into a black and white film stock when it goes into the real world, which is the creation of the play that makes up the bulk of Asteroid City. So,
which is interesting because Oppenheimer also plays with black and white and color in a similar, not necessarily for the same purpose, but in that way that tries to demarcate what's happening right now as opposed to what happened in the past, as opposed to what's happening in the future, right? There's this play, and
and I think you can draw a parallel with the Los Alamos city that Oppenheimer creates, which is its own reality, separate from the other reality of say, the Senate hearings that we see Robert Downey Jr. go through, his life with his wife and his mistress, and all of that stuff. It's almost like the Los Alamos compound is its own world, like Barbie world is its own world.
Good point.
Like the Asteroid City is its own world.
These artificially constructed worlds for these characters to exist in that are kind of outside.
And they're created by a single person.
Yeah.
So Asteroid City is created by the playwright. I think it's
the Jason Schwartzman character, right?
No. He's in the play. No, the playwright.
Oh, the Adrian Brody character?
Brody.
Right, yes, right.
Yeah. Or was it Ed Norton is the
Ed Norton
writer?
is the
I can't remember.
writer in the play.
Yeah. So it's constructed by them.
Exactly.
And then, Robert Oppenheimer constructs Los Alamos, and of course, Mattel constructs Barbie World.
Right.
And
so it's about these three sets of characters in these three movies who are in a world of their own, and then have to deal with consequences in the quote unquote real world. Right? So there's this dichotomy between the fantasy somehow coming to life, and then the juxtaposition of what the consequences of that fantasy is.
Or the
right?
way I've put it in my notes in my hot take or tepid take.
Okay, Whoopi, let's hear it.
Is order versus chaos. And I think that is what all three films have in common is a juxtaposition between an order, which can be seen as like a fascist order, can be seen as a matriarchy or a patriarchy. More matriarchy. The patriarchy in Barbie is more chaotic.
Right.
Or the heavily mannered, manufactured, stiff, cold, Wes Anderson-y world of Asteroid City versus the black and white sequences, which are a bit messier.
Right.
Still very, very mannered, but much more.
Yeah, but they don't have that stilted quality. You're
Right.
exactly right. Yeah, I totally agree with that take. It's a good hot take.
It is hot.
Yeah, it is. It's just
Flaming hot.
Well, okay.
Sorry.
I'm not even going to go with the joke I was thinking of because it's inappropriate. But it does have something to do with the word flaming. But anyway, yeah, I think that's really fascinating. I didn't even put those together as you're pointing out right now. That makes them, all three movies, really, really connect in this way that has to do with this idea of a constructed world, right? And
each of those constructed worlds have these big cracks. And I think in Asteroid City, the cracks are, the emotions that come through some of the characters. The things I really did like about Asteroid City was there's a lot of genuine warmth and very touching moments with Jason Schwartzman and Scarlett Johansson, and the Tom Hanks character as well with his grandchildren. And I think those sort of crack the facade in really interesting ways.
Yeah, and the desert setting is very emotional as well, because being in the desert is like being lost or being empty, being kind of in this state of arid, dryness, and death and all that stuff, right? And it is about those characters trying to, crack the frozen sea inside, as they say, right?
In Barbie, it's how Margot Robbie is suddenly thinking about death and has cellulite and all these things.
And flat feet.
And flat feet. And Ken is upset because, he doesn't get to hang with Barbie. And then in Oppenheimer, of course, you've got the threat of communism that's infiltrating the Los Alamos compound.
Right. You've got the threat of communism, and you've got this. It's interesting because the world in which Oppenheimer, it's fascinating how they have to build a town in Los Alamos there, and it becomes populated by thousands at one point, right? Like I think they say like 4,000 people or something, right? Because everybody brings their families and all whatever, and so there's this little quaint little town, and it really is a world that they build for themselves where they live and exist. And they don't take. What's interesting is in all three, I think this is partially the chaos order thing you're talking about, right? The order that is being enacted in something like, let's take Oppenheimer, right? Like they're building a town, and it gets done really quickly, and it's like everything is going well, and they're that's the orderly, disciplined, scientific, whatever thing. But the thing they're building literally can blow up the entire planet, right? And that's the chaos, right? They're dealing literally with chaos, right?
Absolutely. I think that's why that's part of what makes Oppenheimer the much better film of the three of them. I think those themes are much more clear and precise in Oppenheimer. And I think those themes also run through a lot of Nolan's films.
They do, yeah.
Like, even going back to the Batman movie, The Dark Knight, right? That's all about order versus chaos.
Yeah,
the Joker represents chaos.
Right.
Batman represents order, to the point where by the end of the film, Batman is doing this whole wacky thing with the cell phones and doing this anti-terrorism kind of mass spying on everybody just to stop the Joker.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. When you talk about order, everybody would prefer order over chaos, except that order comes with a price, right? And the price is that you tip more and more with order. You tip more and more over towards fascism, right?
Exactly.
And the balance is trying to keep some sense of reality and freedom while maintaining some kind of security. And that's always been a very difficult balance to achieve because, the saying is you give up freedom for security, right? And you forfeit security for freedom, right?
Yep.
So,
It's the price we pay to be America.
yeah. And I think that that's actually interesting because these three films, in their own way, all deal with exactly what we're going through right now in the West, and not just in the West, but this break with reality in the sense that, what we believe, what we cling to politically, the kind of worlds we want to live in. Think of a MAGA person, for example. What world are they living in? They've also been constructing a world, based on, a lot of this, fantasy, and that's where they live. And then the consequences of that are visited upon us in quote unquote reality, right? So I think it does have a lot to do with all three movies deal with this idea of that the fantasies we construct, right, they can be very dangerous if you take them literally. It's like almost like religion in that sense, right? Like if you believe in the Bible or any religious text as dogma, then that's where you see all the evil in the world. Like people living in their own worlds, right, has now infiltrated our world. That reminds me a lot of Barbie, going from Barbie world to real world, right? And how they're mirror reflections of each other in the opposite sense, right?
Right.
And then what is it that people are looking for? So let's talk about the movies, okay? Let's take each one a little bit and spend some time with them.
Great.
Let's start with Barbie.
Sure.
Okay. So I'll tell you what my take on Barbie is. Now, I really do want to see Barbie again and Oppenheimer again and Asteroid City again. So that's a good thing, right? That these were not movies that I felt like, I don't have to see this again, right? But my take on Barbie was that, okay, I didn't love the way it looked the way everybody else does, right? I thought it's not my style. It was too candy-ish and whatever. And then I felt like the LA parts were too drab, too kind of purposefully ugly, So I know it's an impressive looking movie. I get it. And I know that it's based a lot on like MGM musicals and, I could see definitely like Umbrellas of Cherbourg was in there and Wizard of Oz. And
you can see the Singing
in the Rain. Yeah.
Sure.
And I love all those movies. And you can tell Greta Gerwig is like a total movie fanatic, right? And it was written by her and Noah Baumbach, right? Who's definitely more of an art house kind of director and filmmaker and a great writer. But overall, I would say that the movie's look that people talk about all the time as being, super impressive. It kind of made me a little nauseous, right? Having said that, though, I think it was a very, again, I said it was very fun. It was very funny, and it was a good ride. Like it was fun to watch. Good performances all around. Yeah, really, really great. Like Ryan Gosling is great. Michael Cera steals the entire thing. Right? But my problem with Barbie was that the logic was so false. Like it was not false, but incoherent. Right? And we talked about this before. Me and Tom talked about it because we talked about it after the movie. But it's like there's something about the feminist kind of take in it that to me just seems overly simplified. Seems like old concepts of empowerment and patriarchy, it's very binary. The whole thing is very black and white that way, right? Or pink and white, and it bothered me because I was like, this was an opportunity for this film to really make a larger point about all this shit that people talk about: matriarchy, patriarchy, sexism, misogyny, Barbie being a negative stereotype,
body image,
and all that stuff. I just think like everything that every political point it made felt a little hackneyed and tired. So I didn't learn anything new from Barbie, and that bothered me because if you're going to delve into that kind of territory and be overtly political like that, have something really important to say about that stuff, right? So ultimately, I felt that it was a bit shallow, and I would say that the worst thing about it was that it was cynical because I don't know why they had to make Mattel such a big part of the story, because Mattel is like a $40 billion company, right? And if you think like, I know some people, I've read some people saying, oh, well, you know, like they're making fun of Mattel in the movie. Not really.
No, they're not.
No, it's very Keystone Cops, very gentle ribbing, right? And that's just what a corporation will do in order to not, you know, admit that they're using slave labor. You know what I mean?
Like the position that if I can jump in, the whole Mattel part of the movie was my least favorite part.
Yeah.
One, I thought, I love Will Ferrell, but that was super lazy casting. He played the same part in Lego Movie, right. Which is another toy movie, which you know has some similarities to Barbie. And none of the scenes with him and the other so-called executives really worked at all. Yeah,
not funny,
not that funny,
not telling in any way. Yeah,
not cutting. There were some cutting moments in the dialogue, but nothing to do with Mattel. It was all very soft.
Yeah, it was you know, that, and then the ending was not the part where she goes to the gynecologist. That was actually kind of funny and clever. But the ending when she goes up to that Heaven Can Wait sort of like heavenish place with Rhea Perlman, who's playing like the woman who invented
it.
And not only that, but this woman, I can't remember her name, was Ruth something, I think. She was also the person who started Mattel, right? Her and her husband or her partner, right? So again, it's like, don't glorify a corporate, you know, like multi-billionaire. Right?
Mattel made the movie, right? So yeah.
I know, but like, I don't know. I found that was that nudge, wink, wink thing they did there made me kind of like upset, because it's like you're trying to kind of like, you said this to me just a while ago. You said they're trying to have their cake and eat it too.
Right. Exactly.
And it's like that always makes people upset, right? Yeah. Because it's like, you can't do that. Either you're going to make a fucking statement or you don't, or you make a kids movie or whatever. I thought it was interesting what they were trying to do, but I just don't think they could, right? They couldn't really take it to that place where it would have become like a fucking great movie if they didn't have all this money behind it and all these corporations and all this marketing behind it, right? So, I don't know. I feel like that is one of the worst things about movies, and I don't like it when, you know, it's like, this happens all the time. It's like the mainstream always tries to sniff around what's going on with the teenage girls and what are they into, and you know, what are
like co-opt it
and they make a pair of jeans. That's exactly what, you know, whatever it is, right? So I understand that's the way it works, but this movie just seemed to be the you know, a quintessential example of that kind of thing, right?
Yeah. I don't disagree with you on any of those things. I did like the film, I think, a little bit more than you did. Going back to the politics of the film, the feminism of the film is completely first year, like it's so surface. But in a way, it kind of has to be, because this is a movie that's going for such a broad audience, and I think a lot of the audience probably hasn't really explored.
Hasn't read
issues.
Judith Butler, yeah, right.
And so I would imagine, you know, a lot of the audience might be seeing something new where they say, hey, wait a minute, you know, I am kind of like following the patriarchy a little too closely. Maybe I should think about this a little bit more.
Right.
You know, I mean, even me, like there's a funny bit in the film where the Barbies are trying to get the goods on the Kens who have now taken over and become these like Andrew Tate like patriarchal apes. And one of them says, "Oh, I'll just pretend I've never seen The Godfather," and then he'll mansplain it to me, and I'll have him wrapped around my finger. And what's really funny is that I did exactly that in real life just a few months ago, like a year ago, with my girlfriend, where she said, "Oh, I've never seen The Godfather," and then I did exactly what they did in the movie. So
Wait a minute, your girlfriend never saw The Godfather? Hell?
No, she hadn't seen it.
Oh my God! All right.
So, yeah, but I became like supreme douchebag about it, and I'm sorry, honey.
Well,
But it's just really funny. I think there is some things in the film, as simplistic as they are, that a lot of people probably aren't really thinking about, on a broader scale.
right. I mean,
But for you and I, and for most of our peers, yeah, it's a movie that feels just way too surface, and because of that, its politics never properly gel.
Well, I mean, yeah, 'cause
it's very messily. The feminist message of the film is very messy, and it is co-opted by the corporate influence of Mattel.
I mean, it's definitely that, and it's really interesting. You say that you talk about Will Ferrell, because it's true. You know what makes Will Ferrell? What's his when you think about his star and what his character has always been, he always plays a guy who's like a child, right? Mm-hmm. And that trope of the man-child, right, has been very popular in comedy movies in the West for like 30 years, right? I mean, since like Adam Sandler movies, and there's always a bit of a nod and a wink, like we're acting like idiots on purpose. Seth Rogen. Is that his name? Seth Rogen. Yeah, Seth Rogen, and all those guys, right?
Yeah,
There's
the whole Judd Apatow / Adam McKay.
Exactly.
Genre.
Yeah. Eastbound and Down, even that kind of thing, where it's like a guy who's like a kid, right? And that idea, and now I'm not in any way endorsing this idea, but I think it's an interesting idea, which is that with the overcorrection, right, that we've had to do as a society in order to deal with just marginalization of women over millennia, right? There's this, you just see it in the media, right? That there's this need to deny or degrade men as toxic, as idiots, as mansplainers, as there's just very few things a man with quote unquote confidence can do, especially if you're a white man, right? But if you're like Michael Cera in the movie, where you're like sort of like a femi man, you're kind of there to support the women and stuff like that, that's okay, right? And so this message, while I can understand its need, I understand the impetus that comes from women who are basically pissed off, right? And rightly so. But ultimately, I kind of feel it's the same as reverse racism for me, right? It's like, sure, we all make jokes about white people now, and that's okay. Nobody has a problem with that, right? Except unless you're a white supremacist, right? But ultimately, I feel a little uncomfortable with it, because I do think, from a philosophical point of view, just from an ethical point of view, it's just the same thing, right? It's just a power dynamic difference. Right. And this is all very problematic, because what is that power that you're looking for, right? And what's interesting about Barbie is that's why I said I had such a problem with the ending. If what they had in Barbie Land was a kind of empowerment of women, where everything was, you're living your best, what is it? You're living your best day ever.
Your best life.
But living your best life. It's weird that she would not want that, right? That she would not want that when that's sort of what the whole movie is trying to say you should have, right?
I didn't mind that so much, because one of the things I liked about the ending was that she chooses sort of the chaos, if you will, like the messy world of real life, which people don't live their best lives all the time. the final scene of the film is she goes to see the gynecologist, which is kind of a joke because, of course, Barbie doesn't have any genitalia.
Well,
and but all of a sudden now she does because she's in the real world.
Well, that's it. And like, sorry, you can actually read that ending in a very anti-feminist way according to the very logic of the film, right? Because in the very beginning of the film, the 2001 parody, there are little girls with their babies. And, that was a very famous thing that, up until a certain point, I guess until the 60s or something, all girls were given babies and T-sets and, were basically mothers in training. Mm-hmm. And then, in the movie, they show them, these little girls destroying their baby dolls, right? When they see statuesque monolith Barbie, right? Now, at the end, Barbie's last act is to go to the gynecologist, right? At least for me, the confusing elements there are that she's choosing to live in a patriarchy where she's now concerned with having a baby, right? So the role that she's trying to put herself in is actually the one that fits best in a patriarchal society, right?
I think she is. I mean, our world is still a patriarchy. So yes, she is choosing to live in a patriarchy because she's choosing to live in the real world.
And to go to a gynecologist.
Well, doesn't mean she's concerned about pregnancy.
Well, but that's what it implies, right? You only go to the gynecologist.
Yeah, I didn't read it that way at all.
You only go to the gynecologist for a couple of reasons. I mean, you go for a checkup, just to make sure you're not.
That's how I read it. I read it as this is someone who didn't used to have genitalia, now she does. So she needs to go to the gynecologist. She's moved away from the fantasy world of being a toy to the real world of being a woman.
Nonetheless, I think gynecologist is loaded.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
I'm just saying he could have done it by just going to a doctor, right? But gynecologist is usually something that you go, oh, baby, right? So I know it's not spelled out like that, but it's an interesting thing to add. Mm-hmm. And anyway, for me, it seems to start with the destruction of motherhood as a concept for women and then end with the embracing of motherhood.
That
right?
is interesting. Yeah.
So, and those are just some of the problems with it. I don't know. Maybe it's even deeper than we think. You never know, right? Because, again, these are very intelligent filmmakers and writers. So there could be a lot of stuff in there. But I have the feeling they were hamstrung. I get the feeling they wanted to do a lot of stuff and they got a little bit hamstrung.
That's a really good point, because I know you and I differ on Greta Gerwig's earlier films a little bit. You didn't like Little Women as much as I did.
I haven't seen Lady Bird.
You haven't seen Lady Bird, okay. Both films I love. And, I would say Greta Gerwig has directed, I guess, 3 films now. Barbie's her worst film. I still liked it. But it does feel like a movie that is, as you put it exactly, hamstrung by the need for this to be $1 billion grosser.
Yep.
Trying to make it smart, but not too smart. Trying to have its cake and eat it too.
Yeah, that's it.
And it's a very clever film, but it also keeps reminding you how clever it is, scene after scene after scene, which to me got very annoying. I mean, I felt like about 2/3 of the way through, once it's sort of established that, Ken's now become a, uber patriarch with his horses and his fur vest and his saloon doors. And that it just started spinning its wheels a little bit.
I agree. I think that's it. I guess I would say ultimately it's like it's an interesting failure. That's how I would put it. But but definitely, like, okay, I'm not the demographic for this movie. That's fine. I get that, But what I see is, obviously this could be something very, and it is very exciting for younger people, and because I think what's clever about it is that it reflects enough of populist, feminist, gender theories that are out there on the internet and stuff. It's just enough, right? So it's not going into academia. It's not going into a PhD or something, about feminism. But you're right. Like you said this earlier, and it's true. It's like just enough that especially younger people, I think, are going to really respond to it like, wow, it's really smart and it's really whatever,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So I think it's good.
We all know Gerwig and Baumbach are much smarter than this movie. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I would say is, I think they kowtowed to that Twitter mob kind of thing a little bit too much, right? Like, I've heard some critics say this, and I don't fully disagree with this, although a lot of people immediately go, no, but, I mean, I do think there's a demeaning of men in the Barbie world, because if you remember the whole the whole thing about the guys in Barbie Land is they don't have any positions, they don't have any ambitions, they don't have any. They're beach bums basically, right? And just into looking good, and the one thing they look forward to is getting Barbie's attention, right? So that's all they do. So it's like a reverse.
It's a reverse of a patriarchy. Well, it's like a matriarchy, but when we think of the term matriarchy, we don't think of it as being as well
a reverse patriarchy.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just something a little bit different.
It's different. Yeah.
Yeah. It's definitely not feminist. The film as a whole is very feminist. But the depiction of Barbie world at the beginning, that's not a feminist world at all. It's a very
it isn't. It isn't, right?
I don't think it is at all.
Well, I mean, the whole concept of that the whole power structure is run by women, right?
Well, to me, feminism is equality.
But that's not talked about in the movie ever.
No, it's not. I think it's not talked about. I think when she goes into the real world, that's the closest to sort of an equality that is depicted in the film. Even though we all know that, yes, our real world is not equal. Right. It is still a patriarchy. But in Barbie Land, nobody can seem to get the balance right. First of all, it's such an extreme matriarchy that men are demeaned. Men are only in this position of being supportive and absent.
Right.
They're not allowed in the Barbie house. They stay on the beach, and that's all they do.
Right.
And then when Ken learns about the wonders of patriarchy in the real world and then co-ops it back into Barbie Land and takes over, then it's just this gross but very funny, I thought, world of macho posturing.
Yeah.
But then by the end, there's a scene with Ken and Barbie where she admits that, you're right, I shouldn't have been like that before. I shouldn't have belittled you. I shouldn't have. But it's still not resolved because she escapes. Right.
Well, that's the part. Again, I'm
There's no men. I don't think there's any. Do any men go on the Supreme Court at the end? I can't remember.
I don't know.
So
I don't remember. It could be. I think they're trying to get to that point, though. You're right. Like, at the end, they're trying to say that Barbie Land is going to become more of a balanced situation. But
it's not like at the end of the film, Barbie Land is this perfect feminist equal heaven of wonderment.
Like, what would have been? I think if I was writing it, what I would have done at the end? I would have had.
What would you have done?
I would have. Okay, this is how I'm going to do this. Actually, I'm going to rewrite Barbie, and at the end, Barbie and Ken, all the Barbies and Kens, go to Mattel and blow it up. Sort of like the end of Fight Club. That would be what they should. That's logically what they should do.
It's like the end of the It's a Wonderful Life sketch with Dana Carvey when, let's kill Mr. Potter.
Yeah, son of a bitch.
Anyway,
okay, so let's talk about Oppenheimer now.
Okay.
So I'll tell you, we went to see it together and
in IMAX.
And yeah, I mean, I'm not a huge Christopher Nolan fan. I mean, I like some of his movies a lot, and then a lot of them I feel are kind of like, So he could be a bit cold, a bit analytic in a way that I don't, really sort of, I don't feel connected to the movies as much. But this one I really liked a lot, and I think it might be his best movie. I have to see it again to make sure, but it's actually
certainly like top three for me anyway.
Yeah, because it's a very difficult movie to have put together, and to have this kind of pacing that was amazing. Like, for a 3-hour movie to feel like this to flow this naturally, and never ever do you look at your watch. Like even
Never.
in Barbie, I got bored
Yeah.
sometimes, right? But in this one, I never got bored because there was enough. It's all about the way it's constructed. In a way, there's an architecture to the way the film is done that is equally interesting to the storylines, right? He does that a lot. Like he did the same thing in Dunkirk. He does this thing where he likes to play with the form. But in this one, I really felt like it clicked in a way that was really powerful. You know, the performances across the board were. I can't think of a bad performance in that movie, right?
Absolutely stunning.
Like stunning. Like Matt Damon is amazing. Of course, Cillian Murphy is, just his face is incredible. Like those eyes, right?
He'll be in a scene with like a whole bunch of stars, recognizable actors.
You're looking at him,
Yeah. Nolan deliberately cast big stars in even the smallest roles because he knew it was such a complex story with so many characters that he was worried that the audience would lose track of who was who unless they cast recognizable faces.
Smart.
But each time, you can't take your eyes off Cillian Murphy,
No
matter who's in the scene with him.
Exactly, yeah. He's just a magnetic presence. And Nolan knows this about Cillian Murphy, that his face is just incredible in a huge close-up on IMAX. Very few people can get away with that, right? But his face, his eyes are so penetrative and yet sorrowful and deep and
his angular features.
His angular features, he's almost beautiful, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so there's this kind of like you enjoy looking at him, right? But there's also something about he gets that look of the actual Oppenheimer, if you see him, where there's a kind of removed, far away kind of look, like he's seeing something very big, right? And there's that, and then there's the whole, like you said, like the building of the town, the building of the bomb, the whole construction of the bomb is not boring at all. It's really interesting and fascinating.
Yeah, the science becomes pretty clear.
It's pretty clear, yeah. And there's interesting information in there about why it gets started, because the Germans were getting started, and you start to see the complicated ethical positioning of all of these characters, but especially Oppenheimer, who, where you say, well, the Nazis are going to win. What are we going to do with the Japanese and the Germans are going to whatever. There becomes this kind of inevitability, right, to it, that I think Oppenheimer sees very clearly in his own trajectory, right, and he turns very much against it then at a certain point, right, and he becomes this kind of scapegoated, really put upon figure, right? Yeah. So I just think it was it was a brilliant movie because it also had a lot of very subtle things about, there's very few women in the movie, right? Which makes it almost the perfect corollary or to Barbie, right? Because that is like a patriarchy. Right?
Absolutely.
That is the quintessential patriarchy. Yes. The military
scientists,
the being able to, what is man's, greatest aspiration? To be God, right? And
to blow shit up.
And that's it. To be able to destroy the world is to be God, right? So, and he said, his famous quote, now I become death.
I am become death.
Yeah, the destroyer of worlds, right? But that is also saying, now I've become a god, right? And that's what patriarchy is really kind of all about, right? Men always trying to put frames around the world and put labels and conquer it, and kind of put a flag on something, right? Yeah. And you see that he becomes more and more of a softer kind of more feminized character after he starts trying to stop the H-bomb from being built, right? And that's why they have to destroy him, right? But I just thought it was like the scene where they actually detonate the test bomb, it has to be one of the most powerful scenes in a movie I've ever seen.
There are some incredible sequences. Afterwards, there's a scene where he's lecturing to some students, and this is after the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings, and he starts to imagine
That's such a great part.
the effect of a nuclear attack on those students, where you see the bright lights and their skins peeling and they're screaming, and he can't get that out of his head, and that informs his character throughout the rest of his lifetime as depicted in the film.
That's a great scene, especially because he's still doing the rah talking. It's I don't even know how they did that. It was so well done that he's seeing. So, it's all about the internal and the external, right? You're showing externally this kind of like, we did it, hey, mission accomplished, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. But internally, there's this dread and this fear and this carnage, right? Yeah. And that shows...
You're still celebrating that you did that.
Exactly.
Like you said, you've become a god no matter the consequences.
Yeah, and I think that really... in some ways also connects to Barbie, the concept of the surface being perfect, right? And whatever. But then she says, does anybody here ever think about dying, right? It's like that idea that internally there's more going on than what the surface shows, right? And yeah, I think that was like such a great scene. And yeah, he really deals with something that is... pretty well known. I mean, at least by some people, I guess, right? I mean, I think most people know about Oppenheimer. They know about the whole, the dropping of the bombs and all that stuff. But they really made it very clear how he gets very caught up in the whole "can I do it" thing, and then realizes, what the fuck have I done, right? And
it's like the Jurassic Park line, you're all thinking so much about if you could do it, you never thought about whether you should do it. Jeff Goldblum, ladies and gentlemen.
That's going to be Ishmael's favorite moment from any one of these, since that's one of his favorites from when he was a kid. Yeah, exactly. Now, is there other things you wanted to say about Oppenheimer?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I thought it was excellent overall. I mean, I always have issues with Nolan's films. I probably like him a little bit more than you do, but I agree that he can be very, very cold.
Yeah.
And I think one of the it's funny, you mentioned how it's interesting that there's so few women in Oppenheimer, which makes sense given the milieu of the film. Mm-hmm. But I think Nolan traditionally has a problem with female characters.
I think so too.
And I think that's a problem with this film, where the female characters are, heavily damaged people, and maybe they were in real life. But regardless, it's really an issue, I think.
Well,
the film needed more, something meatier there.
I think you're right. Like, I mean, the only two women who really kind of stand out are his first girlfriend, right? Mm-hmm. Who was the psychiatrist. I can't remember her name right now.
Yeah, the Florence Pugh character.
Yeah, exactly. The Florence Pugh, and she commits suicide. And then his wife, right? Played by
Emily Blunt.
Emily Blunt. And I think she did what she could with that role, and she was...
not to fault the performances.
She was good, but
good.
But it seemed perfunctory,
yeah,
right?
Very underwritten, and it's something that echoes throughout all of his films. Nolan always operates in a very male world,
because he's like that. Like, that's where I think that cold detachment comes from, which is the male brain, which is like the analytic, stepping back, trying to solve a problem, trying to figure something out.
But what's interesting about Oppenheimer, the character is depicted in the film, is that, he is solving the problem. He's figuring everything out. He's very cold and analytical and kind of looking for perfection in what he's doing. But behind his work, his personal life is a disastrous mess. He's having this affair with Florence Pugh while he's married. She's depressed. His wife's an alcoholic. And
they have to give up their kid.
And they give up their kids. And they give up their kids because they're terrible parents.
Yeah.
And and they know it.
Yeah.
And so that's just a whole, and his friendships are messy.
And he almost kills one of his teachers.
Yeah. I'm like, did this really happen?
It did happen, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, and I think it's interesting because that scene when he's at Oxford or whatever, and he wants to go see Niels Bohr give a lecture, and his TA or whatever won't let him because he's behind, and then he decides he's gonna
murder
him by putting poison into his apple, which he does. He injects the apple, then he goes home and immediately starts to think about it and feels bad, and he runs and goes to slaps the apple out of his hand. So
out of Niels Bohr's hand.
Yeah, that's right. It's Niels Bohr, exactly. Yeah. And what's interesting is that that's a metaphor for the entire movie, right? Because everything he's doing, he does on this impulse to kind of like deal with a problem that's in his way,
right?
And then realizes, oh shit, there's too many consequences involved with this now, right?
Which is the entire project.
That's right, and even the bomb, it looks like an apple to a certain extent, right? So I think that's an interesting metaphor that runs throughout the entire film. That's why I think they included that, right?
That's true, and that speaks to the whole idea of the order versus chaos in all of these films. The chaos of all of that, and him trying to impose an order on it, which is also a theme I see that runs through a lot of Christopher Nolan's films.
Yes, I agree.
Like in Dunkirk, you've got the soldiers on the beach, and what saves them is the emotion of the people of Britain who come over on their personal boats.
On their boats,
save
yeah,
them. And that's sort of and that's very chaotic,
right?
And that's very the emotional humanity going against the fascism of war,
right?
And in The Dark Knight,
you have the
whole trilogy. You've got a whole in each of the three films. You've got a whole.
Even it is going back as far as Memento, right? Like you've got a guy who wakes up not in a total state of chaos, right? And tattoos himself in order to kind of take some control over his destiny, right?
Right.
So yeah, I think control is a big issue with Nolan. Control and power. And again, I see very similar things in Barbie, right?
For
control
sure.
and power, So there's things. Now, we haven't talked that much about Asteroid City. The thing about Asteroid City that I wanted to talk about a little bit was, first of all, the placement in the desert, right, where the asteroid has hit, is exactly the same terrain as Los Alamos, right? Like it looks the same basically, and in the background in one scene you do see a bomb go off, right?
That's true. I forgot.
So
about
I think
that.
they're actually intimating in that this town is actually very close to that town, right? And instead of a bomb going off in this town, a meteor had hit, or an asteroid had hit the town, and there's this big crater there, and there's aliens and all that stuff, right? But it's a similar kind of concept of the end of the world, right? The end or an apocalyptic event happening. And the end of the world here is very much like similar to what you're saying about like how the chaos really comes from the emotional internal, right? And this mask that everyone's wearing, the stilted talk and the kind of seemingly silly.
That Wes Anderson-y thing.
Yeah, that thing where people are just sort of small talking, right? But there's something very painful in the way they're restraining, right?
Because most of the characters are going through something emotional in their background. Jason Schwartzman is dealing with...
He's lost his wife.
wife. I forget what Scarlett Johansson's going through, but it's very, very... It's some trauma in her life.
Yes, that's true. She also lost somebody. Yeah.
Is it her mother or...
Yeah, I can't remember that either.
Yeah.
But
I saw the film back in May.
Yeah, I'd like to see it again because that one actually, out of all of these movies, that was the most complicated one.
Yeah.
I mean, it was. I think one of the reasons why it didn't do as well as it could have is it was very, very complicated in terms of what, like, there's the Bryan Cranston TV show that starts it all, right? Then there's the play. Then there's the actual movie.
Yeah.
There's the movie of the play, right? So it's layered. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I know
There's boxes within boxes.
it's like
within boxes.
it's like the Grand Budapest Hotel taken to another
Yeah.
level, right? And plus, you're in one location for most of it, right? So it can seem a little bit dry, a little bit slow, right? But there's something very. I found it just emotionally kind of very affecting, right? Like, not just at one part. Usually there's always, he's like that kind of filmmaker that the whole movie you're just going, oh, these are just wacky characters. And then there'll be one or two scenes where you just break down crying, right? Like, when Ben Stiller says it's been a tough year to Gene Hackman in Royal Tenenbaums. It just gets you because it's like, it's an understatement, but you also see the breakdown at that moment, right? Or, Life Aquatic,
even Rushmore.
Rushmore. Yeah, there's always these scenes where you feel, you go, shit, how did he get me to get so emotional when it's like this cartoony thing? And that's his genius, I think, right? I think there's similar thematics going on, in Asteroid City. What I'm interested to know, and I haven't quite put it together, is why are we focused on, like, why are these three movies, to me, focused on this fulcrum point in our cultural history just after the war, right? Just after that, when, the 50s, the happy days, the kind of like, this kind of, I think it's something like what you're talking about. I think you nailed it, like the order and chaos. The idea that after the war, there was this order or this sense of order, at least for white people. For white people. Okay.
Well,
Not for black people, but I'm saying for white people. Okay. But there was that kind of Leave It to Beaver kind of, there was this mythos, right? Like of, everybody's got money, everybody can have a house, everybody's, good folks, whatever. And I think that mirage, that front started to erode more and more through the 60s, right? Until we saw that
there's some subversive elements in some 50s cinema, or even late 40s cinema.
In cinema, for sure, yes. Yeah.
But
not TV, but yes.
Not TV, no. But culturally, you're right. I mean, it's not until the counterculture in the 60s when that starts.
Well, yeah, because I mean,
if
people always say the 50s, happy, it looks all very, American graffiti and the whole thing. But you got to remember, if you were black, it wasn't like that.
No.
Right? So, as a matter of fact, it was a nightmare, right? Because your kids would get spit on if they tried to go into an integrated school. Right. You couldn't sit at the front of the bus. All that stuff. You couldn't drink out of white-only fountains, right? So that's what I'm saying. That concept of the order, which masks the chaos, right, is kind of like the theme of all of these movies.
But why are these films now, though? Like, is there a reflection in our world today in 2023 where are we finding that we live in a mask?
I think that
is chaos around the corner.
I think so. I think we're in a hyper anxious time for a number of reasons, right? I mean, there's just this, and it's cultural, right? It's not only cultural; it's also like political, right?
It's psychological,
and I mean, for sure. But I mean, definitely, I would say it's economics more than anything in politics that have led us to this kind of huge wage gap, between like the very rich and the very poor, and the fact that like housing has gone up in a crazy way and wages have not followed. That we just live in this hyper capitalistic, oligarchy, right? And so, that's what's causing so much stress on younger people. Like, think of your son and my son, right? Like,
oh yeah,
what are they going to do? Like, like I think about this all the time. Like, I know Ishmael is talking about moving out, but it's like, where are they going to go? And like, how are they going to afford it? Because like even a shitty like one bedroom costs like $2,000 a month now, right? So, it's just not a sustainable situation.
I was
right?
like, when I bought my house, which I still live in, I was like 32 years old. Can you imagine?
Yeah.
Like people can't...
I bought this house when I was like 36 years old or
Yeah.
whatever, right? So, and the thing is, it was crazily cheap by today's
yeah.
standards,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
And
It's insane.
yeah, and so, it's like
young people today,
they don't know. Of course
if they live
not.
in Toronto, they're never going to
They're not going to
own
know.
a house.
You have to go pretty far out of Toronto now to get something.
Spending all your money on groceries.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, no, it's true. And the thing is, so I think that's what part of it, that we're going back to another fulcrum moment in time where the things that happened there, Barbie becoming this model for white little girls to become this kind of impossible beauty and all that stuff, and the H-bomb now being put together, another toy for men, a male toy that can destroy, so one is destroying girls' self-esteem, and the other one is destroying the entire world. Yeah. So there are these destructive elements behind the thing we need to do in order to compromise with chaos always reveals chaos behind it if you look close enough, right? There's a destructive element to even these bright, sunny Barbie land places,
well, that's
right?
what the films are about.
I know.
The
right.
cracks that are in Los Alamos,
Yes.
the cracks that are in Barbie world.
Right. The fissures in the seamless,
Exactly.
seemingly seamless.
And I think
thing.
today too, there's so many elements of cultural anxiety besides the economics. I mean, Oppenheimer is about the the bomb to a certain degree, and then we've got a war in the Ukraine where we have Putin threatening
Nuclear bombs.
nuclear bombs. You've got Trump in the U.S., who's a dangerous fascist who could become the next president again. While sitting in jail, perhaps.
Yeah.
I don't think it will either, but
it's possible.
It's certainly possible.
Yeah.
So there's a huge anxiety around that, and around and
And
then the
then-
world's on fire.
Yeah. There's
So
the climate.
Climate change
Yeah.
is a huge, massive anxiety.
Of course.
For people who just watch it on TV, let alone the people who are victims of it.
Oh, it's fucking scary. I've
It's
had more
terrifying.
panic moments this year about climate than I've ever had before in my life. And that's my bad. But the thing is, now it's coming. It's like, shit, dude, you can't look away from this now, right? Like when the
I
whole
have family in Kelowna.
Yeah.
I mean, who are just
oh yeah,
panicking.
And look at what happened in Hawaii.
Hawaii.
That's fucked up, right?
Yeah.
Like it's right you're right on the coastline, guys. Like what's going on? There's just water here, right? How did this whole place go up, right?
Yeah, and it went up huge.
The whole place is just
massive loss of
destroyed.
life.
Yeah. And so this is not going to get better before it's going to get worse before it gets better if it does.
If it ever gets better.
Yeah, if we're not idiots. And then, on the other hand, the other side of that is the identity issues that people have today, right? Mm-hmm. We used to call this an identity crisis back in the 70s or whatever. Psychiatrists would call it, you're having an identity crisis, right? Well, now the whole world is having an identity.
You're crazy if you don't.
Yeah. Well, what is identity, right? People are trying to figure out. People only go through this kind of anxiety when at bottom they don't know who they are, right? Mm-hmm. We're all kind of saying what's this world we live in? Who are we? What are we doing, right? Mm-hmm. Because I've said this before, and it's kind of true. It's kind of perverse, but you have to kind of go with me on this. The one gift that Trump gives us is that he makes it very clear how flimsy all of the agreements we have as a society with each other are, right? Once you start poking holes in the judicial system and the other institutions that run our society, you see that they're just kind of made out of paper, right? They're just us agreeing to, okay, that's how it runs, okay. Yeah. Like the peaceful transfer of power, that's just an agreement. There's no, people don't have to do it, right? Yeah. And he didn't do it.
As soon as he was elected, he just, free trade agreements, he just ripped them up.
He just ripped them up. And the thing is, that's what I'm saying, that these things we take for granted are not natural, right? They're easily ripped apart, right? And I think the pandemic also showed us that. I remember going for a walk once with Rui, with my friend Rui, and I was saying, it's amazing how in a matter of days, all cities around the world just transformed into these ghost towns, right? Mm-hmm. And it showed us that the thing that we were doing every day, which was going through a routine, going to work, coming home, seeing our families for an hour or so, watching TV, going to bed and start the whole thing again, that was gone.
Yeah.
Right? And so you say, well, what was that? What we were doing before that? I mean, if it was so easily, like a virus comes and the whole thing shuts down, right? And for 2 years, like we were basically living in this kind of, we were sheltered in our homes, right?
We were terrified.
We didn't know what
was going to happen.
And partly there was something in it that was liberating, right? And that's what I think, that's the positive you can see about somebody like Trump too, that as shitty a human being as he is, he reveals something that we were papering over,
right?
For all of this time, which
Right.
is, okay, this stuff is not etched in stone.
He exposes the fissures.
Exactly,
In the order, right?
exactly, and I think that's why these movies are similarly themed, around this anxiety that we're going through right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's and with that,
I have to take a dump. That's another catastrophe waiting to happen.
that's a whole Oppenheimer.
Talk about your
situation.
H-bomb. Now, do we even know what we're going to be recording next? If you wanted to.
Well, we talked about recently one of the legendary Hollywood filmmakers, William Friedkin, passed away.
Oh yes.
And Azed and I were discussing perhaps an
Exorcist?
episode about Friedkin and about the lasting cultural legacy of The Exorcist.
Okay, let's do it.
Which is never stops being part of the conversation.
Well, I know that me and you have both talked about this and how fucking scared we were of The Exorcist.
It is the scariest movie
I've
ever
seen
made.
you've watched 100 horror films like even recently you've been really into
I've
horror.
seen The Exorcist like twice in the theater,
right?
Let alone
I've seen The
million times
Exorcist
at home.
like at least 10 times. But the thing is, it still scares me. And the thing is, when I was a kid, oh shit, I spent weeks not being able to sleep. So yeah, I think I told you this. I was writing a paper for a magazine once here on The Exorcist. So I spent like a year working on this paper, which never got published. But I did a lot of research on The Exorcist. So yeah, that would be a really interesting one.
So stay tuned for that.
Okay,
my friends,
and stay tuned for my dump. I'm going to record the dump when I go up there now. All right. See you next time.
Okay. See you next time. And I'll see you.